Have you ever wondered what truly lies beneath the surface of Tibetan history? Tucked away in the heart of the majestic Himalayas, Tibet is a land of profound mystery, ancient wisdom, and untold stories. Its vast, snowy mountains have witnessed centuries of spiritual evolution, political upheaval, and cultural transformation. At the core of it all lies Buddhism, a religion that not only shaped Tibet's history, but also its very identity. Tibetan Buddhism is more than just a religion. It's a way of life. It has influenced everything from daily rituals to grand philosophical teachings, offering answers to life's deepest questions. But what if everything you thought you knew about Tibet's spiritual journey was only part of the picture? What if the rise of Buddhism in this land wasn't just a story of enlightenment, but also of survival and resilience in the face of unimaginable odds? As we dig deeper into Tibetan history, we uncover layers of conflict, compassion, and resistance that reveal a people who refuse to be silenced. Through centuries of foreign invasions, cultural assimilation, and political struggles, the Tibetan people have managed to preserve their unique identity against all odds. The Dalai Lama, the exiled spiritual leader, is just one figure who embodies the strength of this ongoing battle. Join me on this journey into the heart of Tibetan history, where every story is a testament to survival, spirituality, and the unyielding will of a people who have fought to keep their culture alive for generations. To truly grasp the essence of Tibetan history, we must first understand the birth of Tibetan Buddhism. Imagine this. It's the 7th century, and the Tibetan plateau is about to witness one of the most significant cultural shifts in its history. King Songtsen Gampo, a visionary and powerful ruler, opens the gates of Tibet to Buddhism. But this wasn't a simple or peaceful transition. It was a collision of worlds. Tibet, at the time, was deeply rooted in its indigenous Bon religion, a spiritual practice that had flourished for centuries. The Bon traditions, with their vibrant rituals and deep connection to the natural world, held a firm grip on the hearts of the people. When Buddhism arrived, it wasn't welcomed with open arms. In fact, it faced fierce resistance. The spiritual leaders and communities who followed Bon were wary of this new foreign influence, viewing it as a threat to their way of life. But over time, something incredible happened. Instead of Buddhism being a mere adoption of foreign beliefs, it began to evolve. Slowly, piece by piece, the teachings of Buddhism blended with the native traditions of Tibet. What emerged wasn't just a copy of what was seen in India or China. It was something entirely unique, shaped by the landscape, the people, and the struggles they faced. Tibetan Buddhism didn't just survive, it transformed. It became a rich, distinct practice, a fusion of ancient wisdom and new teachings, all while holding on to the essence of Tibetan culture. This blend of spiritual depth, compassion, and resilience is at the heart of what makes Tibetan history and Tibetan Buddhism so profound. When Buddhism arrived in Tibet, it wasn't just about rituals and prayer. It sparked a cultural revolution that would forever transform Tibetan society. Tibetan Buddhism became a profound intellectual and artistic movement, one that would reshape the very fabric of Tibetan life. The introduction of Buddhism was not simply the arrival of a religion, it was the beginning of a new era, an era where spirituality intertwined with every aspect of daily existence. A pivotal figure in this transformation was the great scholar Padmasambhava. His journey to Tibet wasn't just a passage of time, it was the birth of something extraordinary. Padmasambhava established the Nyingma tradition, one of the oldest schools of Tibetan Buddhism. But his influence went far beyond the teachings he brought with him. He infused Tibetan Buddhism with a unique blend of mysticism, philosophy, and the supernatural, which resonated deeply with the people of Tibet. This wasn't just intellectual growth, it was a spiritual awakening that laid the groundwork for centuries of Tibetan Buddhist thought. As Buddhism spread across Tibet, it gave rise to the building of monasteries that became centers of learning and wisdom. These sacred spaces were not only places of worship, they became intellectual hubs where scholars delved into ancient texts, refined philosophical thought, and expanded on the mystical traditions that were uniquely Tibetan. The monasteries became the heart of Tibetan culture, preserving knowledge and fostering a sense of unity among the people. Libraries were created, filled with teachings that would be passed down through generations. Through these monasteries and teachings, Tibetan Buddhism became the backbone of Tibetan society, shaping its art, its philosophy, and its way of life. The influence of Buddhism in Tibet wasn't just spiritual, it was transformative, creating a culture where the divine and the earthly intertwined in ways that were both beautiful and profound. Tibet's golden age arrived during the reign of King Trisong Detsen, a time when the kingdom reached new heights of power and influence. Under his leadership, Tibet was not only politically strong, but spiritually transformed. This was the period when Buddhism truly took root, no longer just a foreign idea, but a central force in the very fabric of Tibetan life. The royal court became a sanctuary for Buddhist teachings, where monks and scholars from all corners of the world gathered to exchange ideas. One of the most pivotal moments of this age was King Trisong Detsen's invitation to the greatest Buddhist scholars from India. Among them was Shantarakshita, an esteemed philosopher and teacher who played a vital role in establishing Tibet's first Buddhist monastery at Samye. This monastery wasn't just a place of worship, it was a beacon of knowledge, a space where the profound wisdom of Buddhism would be studied, preserved, and passed down for generations. But it wasn't just the spiritual transformation that defined this period. Tibet experienced a renaissance of culture, where art, philosophy, and spirituality converged in ways that were both breathtaking and profound. The people of Tibet created beautiful Thangka paintings, intricate sculptures, and awe-inspiring architecture, all infused with deep spiritual meaning. Intellectual thought flourished as Tibetan scholars began to interpret and expand on the teachings they had received, crafting a unique philosophical system that would influence not only Tibet, but the broader Buddhist world. This was a time when Tibetan culture reached its peak, when spirituality was woven into every aspect of life, and the kingdom became a shining light of artistic and intellectual achievement. Tibet's golden age was a celebration of harmony, where the sacred and the secular existed in perfect balance, and Buddhism was not just a belief, but the heart and soul of an entire civilization. As Buddhism deeply took root in Tibet, something remarkable began to unfold. Tibet, once a secluded and mysterious land, soon found itself at the heart of a cultural and spiritual revolution that reached far beyond its borders. Buddhist monks and scholars began to travel to neighboring lands like China, Nepal, and India, spreading the unique teachings of Tibetan Buddhism. It wasn't just the message of Buddhism that traveled, it was a way of life, a way of thinking, and a philosophy that resonated across the continent. Tibet, during this time, transformed into a bridge between Central Asia and the rest of the world. The flow of ideas, art, and culture began to move in all directions, with Tibet acting as both a receiver and a giver. Tibetan monks brought with them new interpretations of ancient texts, while Tibetan art and philosophy began to inspire neighboring cultures in profound ways. The intricate Thangka paintings, the stunning architecture, and the deep spiritual practices became a beacon of influence that stretched across Asia. At the height of its power, the Tibetan Empire wasn't just a political force, it was a spiritual and cultural powerhouse. Its reach extended far beyond military conquests or royal alliances. Tibet's cultural and philosophical impact shaped not only neighboring regions, but also the course of Buddhist development across Asia. Tibetan teachings blended with the cultures of China, Nepal, and India, leaving an indelible mark on the religious and intellectual landscape. This was the true power of Tibet, not in its armies, but in its ideas, its art, and its spiritual wisdom. As the Tibetan Empire flourished, it didn't just conquer lands, it transformed minds and hearts, creating a legacy that continues to resonate in the world today. The 13th century marked a dramatic turning point in Tibetan history, one that no one could have predicted. The Mongol Empire, led by the fearsome Kublai Khan, turned its gaze toward Tibet. Most invasions bring destruction and chaos, but this one was different. Instead of decimating the Tibetan people, the Mongols saw something they deeply respected: the profound wisdom of Tibetan Buddhism. Kublai Khan and his empire, which had conquered vast swaths of Asia, found themselves drawn to the teachings of Tibetan Buddhist monks. The spiritual practices of Tibet resonated with the Mongol rulers, and soon they began to adopt Tibetan religious customs into their own lives. This was an unexpected alliance, one built not on military dominance, but on a shared reverence for the spiritual power that Buddhism offered. As the Mongols embraced Tibetan Buddhism, a remarkable shift occurred. Tibetan Buddhist leaders, once isolated in their Himalayan monasteries, found themselves gaining unprecedented influence at the Mongol court. Tibetan lamas and scholars became trusted advisors to the Mongol rulers, guiding them not only in matters of spirituality, but in politics and governance. This unique partnership between the Mongols and the Tibetans combined military strength with spiritual authority in a way the world had never seen before. The Mongols, who once ruled with brute force, now relied on the deep wisdom of Tibetan Buddhism to govern their vast empire. At the same time, Tibet gained a level of political influence it had never experienced, all through the vehicle of spiritual wisdom. This unexpected alliance between two very different worlds helped shape the future of Tibet and created a lasting impact that would resonate through the centuries. It was a fusion of power and spirituality that demonstrated how deeply Tibetan Buddhism had permeated not just the lives of the people, but the very fabric of political life itself. By the 14th century, a new and powerful spiritual leader emerged in Tibet, one whose influence would reach far beyond the borders of the Himalayan plateau. This was the dawn of the Dalai Lama, a figure who would shape the course of Tibetan history for centuries to come. It was during this time that the Gelugpa tradition, founded by the great scholar Tsongkhapa, became the dominant school of Tibetan Buddhism. The teachings of the Gelugpa school, with its emphasis on monastic discipline and the pursuit of wisdom, began to spread across Tibet, offering a path of spiritual clarity and profound philosophical insight. But the role of the Dalai Lama was not confined to just spiritual matters. He became a political leader, entrusted with guiding Tibet through turbulent times, marked by political instability and the looming threats of foreign invaders. The Dalai Lama's leadership was a blend of both spiritual and temporal authority. He was a teacher, a guide, and a protector of Tibet's autonomy. In an era where the region faced internal strife and external pressures, the Dalai Lama stood as a stabilizing force, uniting the people through the strength of his faith and wisdom. As the Dalai Lama's influence grew, so too did the spread of Tibetan Buddhism. His teachings began to travel beyond Tibet's borders, reaching far-flung corners of Asia and beyond. Tibet, once known primarily for its breathtaking landscapes and isolation, began to be recognized for something much deeper: its profound spiritual wisdom. The very soul of Tibet was no longer just its majestic mountains or its unique culture. It was the teachings of the Dalai Lama and the rich tradition of Tibetan Buddhism that had been nurtured over centuries. Tibet's reputation as a beacon of spiritual light became known across the world, making it a place where people sought not just physical solace, but a path to enlightenment. As Tibet continued to flourish spiritually, its political independence began to face mounting threats. By the 17th century, Tibet's sovereignty came into direct conflict with the rising power of China. This clash between the two regions would spark tensions that would echo for centuries, culminating in the fierce struggle for independence that Tibet would face in the 20th century. Tibet, a land of spiritual depth and cultural richness, now found itself at the crossroads of a conflict that was as much about survival as it was about preserving its unique way of life. In these challenging times, Tibet's religious leaders, particularly the Dalai Lamas, fought relentlessly to maintain both spiritual and political autonomy. They understood that the survival of their way of life, the very foundation of Tibetan Buddhism, depended not only on the preservation of their culture, but on their ability to resist outside domination. The Dalai Lamas, as both spiritual and political figures, worked to protect Tibet from external threats while remaining deeply committed to their mission of peace, compassion, and enlightenment. The history of Tibet's resistance against Chinese imperialism is one of profound resilience, defiance, and an unwavering commitment to faith. Despite facing overwhelming odds, military invasions, political manipulation, and cultural suppression, the Tibetan people never wavered in their belief in their sovereignty and their spiritual path. This was not just a political struggle, it was a fight for the very soul of Tibet. Through it all, Tibet's leaders upheld the principles of Tibetan Buddhism, grounding their resistance in the teachings of compassion, non-violence, and justice. This combination of spiritual strength and political resolve became the cornerstone of Tibet's resistance, a resistance that, even in the face of adversity, remains a testament to the enduring power of faith and the unbreakable spirit of the Tibetan people. The Cultural Revolution of the 1960s stands as one of the darkest and most painful chapters in Tibetan history. It was a time of brutal suppression when the very heart of Tibetan culture, the monasteries and religious practices, was ruthlessly attacked. Monasteries that had stood for centuries were destroyed, priceless texts and artifacts burned, and thousands of monks and nuns were imprisoned or killed. Tibet's spiritual identity, built on generations of Buddhist tradition, was crushed under the weight of political oppression. In the midst of this devastation, the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of Tibet and a symbol of Tibetan unity, was forced into exile. The Chinese government sought to silence him, to erase him from the narrative of Tibet's struggle, but they underestimated his resilience. Though in exile, the Dalai Lama's voice grew louder, not just in the context of Tibet, but across the world. He became a beacon of hope, a tireless advocate for peace, compassion, and human rights on the global stage. Even in the face of unimaginable hardship, the Dalai Lama's commitment to his people never wavered. He became a symbol of the Tibetan spirit, unbroken, unwavering, and determined to spread the message of Tibet's suffering and resilience. His teachings, once confined to the monasteries of Tibet, now reached the world, calling for non-violence, justice, and the preservation of Tibet's spiritual heritage. Tibet's struggle for freedom was not just a political battle. It was a fight to protect a way of life, a belief system, and a culture that had thrived for centuries. Through the Dalai Lama's leadership, Tibet's fight for freedom was not silenced, but instead amplified. His message resonated around the globe, reminding the world that no matter how dark the times may seem, the light of compassion, peace, and spiritual resilience can never be extinguished. Today, Tibet stands as a powerful symbol of spiritual resilience and unwavering hope. Though it remains under Chinese control, the Tibetan people continue to fight, not just for political autonomy, but for the preservation of their cultural identity, their traditions, and the very soul of their spiritual heritage. Despite the constant pressures, Tibetans have never wavered in their devotion to the teachings of Buddhism that have defined their lives for centuries. In Tibet, protests continue to echo through the streets as brave individuals risk everything to demand recognition of their rights and the preservation of their way of life. But the struggle isn't just taking place in Tibet. Across the globe, the Dalai Lama has become a voice for the oppressed, leading international campaigns that advocate for Tibet's freedom and the protection of its spiritual traditions. His voice, which once rang out from the mountains of Tibet, now echoes in the halls of the United Nations, in peace talks, and in the hearts of people everywhere. The Tibetan spirit, though tested and battered, is far from broken. It is a spirit that has endured countless hardships, from the Cultural Revolution to the ongoing struggles of the present day. It is a spirit rooted in compassion, in non-violence, and in a deep, unwavering connection to the land and to the teachings of the Buddha. The struggle of the Tibetan people is not merely political. It is a battle to preserve a culture, a way of life, and a belief system that stretches back thousands of years. Tibetan Buddhism, with its emphasis on peace, mindfulness, and spiritual freedom, remains a beacon of light in the face of oppression. The teachings of the Dalai Lama continue to inspire millions as they offer a reminder that no matter how dark the times may be, the light of truth, compassion, and spiritual resilience will always endure. The fight for Tibet is not just the fight of a people, it is a fight for the preservation of one of the world's greatest spiritual traditions. Tibetan Buddhism, once isolated in the remote valleys and mountain monasteries of Tibet, is no longer confined to its birthplace. It has spread across the globe, influencing people from all corners of the earth, transcending cultural boundaries, and touching lives in ways that few other spiritual traditions have. The teachings of Tibetan Buddhism on compassion, mindfulness, and the transformative power of meditation have made a profound impact on the spiritual landscape of the modern world. But what is it about Tibetan Buddhism that resonates so deeply with people of all walks of life, from the bustling cities of the West to the quiet corners of Asia? Perhaps it's the deep sense of inner peace and tranquility that the practice fosters. In a world where stress, uncertainty, and the fast pace of life often lead to anxiety and exhaustion, Tibetan Buddhism offers a path back to calm. It teaches that true peace isn't found outside ourselves, but within, through mindfulness, self-awareness, and a deep connection to the present moment. Or perhaps it's the timeless wisdom embedded in Tibetan Buddhist philosophy, wisdom that has stood the test of centuries through wars, invasions, and exile. The Dalai Lama and other Tibetan teachers have shared a profound message of compassion, reminding us that the path to true happiness is found not through material wealth or personal achievement, but through kindness, empathy, and the well-being of others. This message of universal love has found fertile ground in the hearts of people around the world who seek to make a positive difference in their own lives and in the world. Whatever the reason, the influence of Tibetan Buddhism continues to grow. It is no longer just a spiritual practice for the people of Tibet. It is a global movement, shaping the hearts and minds of millions. Tibetan Buddhism invites us to slow down, to be present, and to approach the world with compassion and understanding. In doing so, it offers not just a way of life, but a path to healing, personal transformation, and inner peace. And in today's world, where such qualities are needed more than ever, Tibetan Buddhism's light continues to shine brightly for those who seek a deeper, more meaningful existence. As we reflect on the remarkable and enduring journey of Tibetan history, one undeniable truth stands out. The story of Tibet is far from over. Despite facing unimaginable hardships, from invasions to political turmoil, the Tibetan people have shown an extraordinary resilience. Their culture, steeped in ancient traditions and wisdom, continues to thrive and inspire people around the world. Tibetan Buddhism, with its profound teachings of compassion, mindfulness, and inner peace,